I'm now pleased to hand over to Paula McGrath, our Deputy Chief Executive here at Retina UK, who will be leading a panel conversation with members of our community. Together, they'll explore the lived realities of inherited sight loss, the practical and emotional impacts to the resilience and strength. Please welcome Paula, Rob, Jen, Kester, James and Lisa to the stage.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for that very warm welcome. It is fantastic to see so many of you in the room here today, and I know that we've got many folk joining us at home as well. Yes, I'm Paula McGrath, Deputy Chief Executive at Retina UK, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the session, which is Learning from Lived Experience in conversation with our community, who currently look terrified. It's okay, guys, we're going to be all right, it's going to be fun. This lived experience panel has proven really popular over the last few years, and I'm sure that with the excellent panel that we've got lined up today, this year will be no different. James, Kester, Jen, Rob and Elisa all live with inherited sight loss, and they've travelled far and wide today to be here with us to talk to us about their diagnosis, daily impacts, family dynamics, their involvement with Retina UK, peer-to-peer support, research, and the emotional impact. So many of the things that you've heard about in the previous session, we will now bring to life with the lived experience of our panellists. I'm sure you'll all appreciate that these are really personal matters, and we are hugely grateful to these individuals to be willing to sit up here today and talk about really personal things so that we can learn how we can do a better job. Listening to the experiences of people with inherited sight loss is at the heart of everything we do at Retina UK. It's the only way that we can genuinely be sure that we're meeting people's needs. So please do reflect on what you hear from the panel this morning and consider how you can use this insight in your daily work. So our panelists have a wealth of experience, so without further ado, I'd like to invite each of them to introduce themselves, and I know that they'll be really happy to answer your questions at the end of the session. So James, you seem a really long way away over there, but I'm going to come to you first. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so can you hear me, yeah? Is that working?
You're okay.
Oh yeah. My name's James, I'm 25, I'm from Limerick in Ireland. I moved over to Liverpool about 1.5 years ago, and I work for the civil service. So that's
Thank
me.
you. Jen?
Hi, my name's Jen. In my professional life, I work in financial services, and in my spare time, I'm a content creator for people living with sight loss. I'm born and raised in Dubai, spent the first 18 years there, and moved to Cardiff 10 years ago now. And that's me.
Thanks, Jen. Elisa?
Hi, I'm Elisa. I am a student at Brunel University London, studying English for creative writing, and I'll be going into my final year in a couple of weeks.
And Rob?
Good morning, I'm Rob. Anyone that's looking at my body language, I fell down the stairs 8 weeks ago and I've got a really sore shoulder, so I know I look like I'm not wanting to be here, but I'm super excited. I run my own business. I'm a sports therapist and a personal trainer. I'm a triathlon and running coach, and I'm also dabbling in YouTube, so please subscribe to my channel. I'm gonna push it out.
You got that plug in a bit early.
That was super early.
You're not going to do that every time I ask you a question,
yeah,
are you?
Literally,
yeah.
So thank you.
Thanks, Rob. And Kester?
Hello, good morning. Thank you everyone for being here. My name's Kester. I'm from South London, so not quite so far and wide as some people here. I'm currently unemployed, but I do volunteer a little bit with RNIB's wonderful talk and support service, and I'm doing some skills building at the moment.
Thank you. So let's have a bit of a chat then about the sight loss condition that you live with and when you were first diagnosed. Let's keep it simple. I'll come back to you, James.
So I was diagnosed with X-linked retinitis pigmentosa at about 6. I was diagnosed over in Paris, of all places, and yeah, so I've just it's always just been something I've had. Yeah, diagnosed quite young with that, so X-linked RP is me.
Okay, and Jen?
So my father has retinitis pigmentosa, and it was always assumed that I would have it. So I was raised very much that it was a matter of fact, even before diagnosis. And then When I started to lose more of my sight at 18, I got diagnosed formally with cone and rod dystrophy, which was a little bit different from what I was expecting to come out. And more recently, I've been diagnosed with something called Coates disease, which is a non-inherited condition. But if I was to describe my current state of play, I can see 10% of the middle bit. So if I was stood in front of you, I can see Kathy's head. So, yeah.
Thanks, Jen. Elisa.
So I was diagnosed with Leber's congenital amaurosis, or LCA, in 2004. So I was 6 months old when I was diagnosed. And for me, nobody in my family has it, so I'm one of the unique ones, I think. That's how I like to see it. So at a very young age, I was taken to Ireland, where I received stem cell therapy, which ultimately restored some peripheral vision. So I was able to see sort of like shapes, shadows, light, contrast. So say, for example, a light thing on a dark background. And then when I was 16, during COVID, it sort of diminished out the blue. And I had no idea that this would happen, leaving me with only sort of light perception. And then last year I was diagnosed with another condition called keratoconus, which means that my cornea of my right eye is sort of pointed, which means that I have no vision in my right eye, and I only have sort of light perception in my left eye. So that's me.
Thanks, Elisa. Rob, things aren't quite as clear for you.
No. Did I mention the YouTube channel?
You did mention the YouTube channel, yeah. We don't need to go there again.
I've got a video on my channel about my trip to Moorfields last year, and I was told from a young age that I had X-linked RP, and I went to Moorfields kind of thinking that I would use it as an experience of getting to know what genetic testing is all about, so I could help other people. And when I was tested, everyone seemed a little bit confused. And the professor came in and said that he didn't think I had X-linked RP, he thought I had something called choroideremia. So I went in there quite confident, knowing I had X-linked RP, and I'm still waiting. So this was October. I was told that I'd find out October this year, so a couple of weeks hopefully, and we'll finally know which way it is.
Thank you. Kester.
So, from childhood, essentially, from very young, my parents knew that my brother and I both had hearing loss, and they were offered genetic testing, but the doctor kind of went, I mean, we can look into what's causing the hearing loss, but it all seems pretty kind of, you know, it's not unusual, it happens sometimes, and my parents went, it's probably fine, there's no further consequences that could come of this. Suffice to say, a few years later, it would turn out that we both have Usher syndrome, which is a syndrome that affects both the ears and also the eyes, causing retinitis pigmentosa. So I was diagnosed when I was about 15, 16 with the condition. Once it was essentially, my brother was caught at a sort of a routine checking up on macular edema, and they looked at the retina and went, oh, something's not going good here. And we were genetically tested and confounded. I should know off the top of my head, but I'm too afraid to say it in a space where everyone's listening.
Kester, can you tell us a little bit about sort of the impact of Usher syndrome on your day-to-day life?
Yes, indeed. Are you asking about the combination of hearing and sight loss?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we talk about, I mean, as an organisation, we support a number of people with hearing loss and sight loss. Our expertise is around the sight loss element, but it is really important to acknowledge that it's, you know, it's different, Kester, when you're living with both.
It adds a lot of complications. On the one hand, I feel sort of lucky that I knew that I had hearing loss from a very young age, which means that when I got older and was diagnosed with sight loss, I was already used to the concept of living with disability. And compared to my peers, I can see how that made a difference in how I relate to both of them. On the other hand, there are lots of things, of course, a lot of adjustments for sight loss are very audio-based. I was talking just this morning about how, of course, with screen readers, I have a bit of a nightmarish time with using that with my phone because I have to factor for hearing aids. And it plays in both hearing aids at the same time, which means I get the choice between hearing what's going on my phone or hearing what's going on in the world around me, which is not a great trade-off, and it's not so simple to just have an earphone in one ear. It is definitely something where, on the one hand, there are some transferable skills between the two, and on the other hand, I think there can sometimes be, less so I think within the professional field, but certainly within the broader field, an assumption that you get one disability at a time, and that's actually probably less common than having sort of multiple things going on all at once that kind of need to be able to interact with one another.
When we spoke before, you mentioned about sort of living with a progressive condition as well, and the need to be constantly changing and evolving. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, absolutely, because my hearing loss is consistent, and that's one thing, because I was able to just learn, okay, this is what I'm doing, and I'm kind of on that level, and there's not much adjustment that needs done there. With the vision loss, that is progressive, which means that I'm constantly needing to adjust to a new way of navigating. I'm in the process of learning how to use screen readers and trying to time that at a time where I have enough vision that I can get away, but at the same time be ahead of the curve so that I'm ready when I don't have the visual acuity to get by. And it's quite exhausting because you're constantly having to be in a space of learning how to do even the basic day-to-day things. You can't just go, I've learned how to do this, I can set and forget. You have to go, I have to rethink how I approach this thing, and I have to rethink how I approach this thing because the habits that I've fallen into are not sustainable in the long term.
And thank you, Kester, and I guess that's probably something that a number of people here will be experiencing, this constant change, just getting used to something and then something else comes along. Obviously with you, Kester, it's the hearing loss and then the sight loss, but even with the progressive loss of sight, it's constantly evolving, isn't it? It's constantly changing. Thank you. Rob, tell me a little bit about how sight loss affects you. It's affected you more just recently, I think, hasn't it? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I was going to be saving this for tomorrow, but...
Do you want everybody to know you're here 2 days as well? Or is that just a...
I mean, yeah, I'm trying to plug tomorrow,
yeah,
basically.
okay, thank you.
But yeah, so I guess 9 weeks ago, I would have been sitting here saying I'm a personal trainer, I'm a sports therapist, I'm a para-triathlete, I'm training for Ironman Hamburg next year. I'm very active, and my kind of invitation was based on the fact that health, fitness, sport, being active is just so important for visually impaired and blind people. I didn't really identify with myself as a blind man. I've had RP a long time, and it sounds strange, but I didn't really identify as myself as being someone that was vulnerable and needed help. My job was to put all of my attention into helping as many other people as I could with the same problem, because a lot of people don't have my support network. They don't have my kind of resilience and confidence from being in sport. 9 weeks ago, I lost a friend the week before, a good friend, and that affected me quite a lot. And I put a video out on Friday saying about how life's too short and how much it had affected me. And that weekend, I threw all of my energy into emails, chasing things up, chasing leads down, and really pushing myself. I hadn't really slept well on the Monday night, and Tuesday morning I had a client at 7 a.m. in the morning. And long story short, I came out of my office to walk back to my bedroom, and my wife she's not here so I can say, but she had left the bedroom door open, and we have a Rottweiler bull mastiff cross called Hugo. We've got 3 other dogs, and they move out of my way if I'm walking around the house because they know he's not going to do well with us, so they move. He doesn't, he's a big boy and he just stays there thinking that I'll move around him, but this time I didn't. I tripped over him at the top of the stairs, and I woke up 2 hours later at the bottom of the stairs. So for the first time ever, I no longer had my health, my fitness, my strength to rely on. I was in the hospital for 3 weeks as a blind man, feeling very vulnerable, obviously in a lot of pain. And it was my first real time of identifying as myself as a vulnerable blind person. I didn't like it. And as amazing as I think everyone in the room is for being here, there are so many people that don't have an awareness of what it's like to have sight loss or sight loss and hearing loss or a disability. And I think it's our job as people that care about people with sight loss, for example, to educate them and to really help encourage people, because it's tough. People with sight loss don't want to bang on about the fact that they've got sight loss and they need help, but it's really important, and that's why it was so important for me to come here today and tomorrow. It was non-negotiable for me. Everybody was saying, Rob, you're broken. For you can hear my voice going out, but for my recovery, for myself, I shouldn't be here. But I wanted to be here because it's important that the people that are trying to help people like me with sight loss and like us on stage, you know, what you do makes a massive, massive difference, and you shouldn't underestimate that. And I think I've covered.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob, and thank you for your openness. It's really important that people hear this. What you've touched on there, Rob, is a point of impact, isn't it? A point of impact in your journey with sight loss, and it's something that we talk about an awful lot, isn't it, when we're talking about people's experiences, particularly with well-being, that actually they may be coping really well. They may have lived with a condition for quite a long time, and then something happens, and everything changes. For Rob, that was a point of impact for you, your accident. Sometimes it's somebody losing a partner, losing their guide dog, no longer being able to make the journey to work, whatever it is. But it's really important to recognise, and I'm sure you all do, but this isn't a linear journey. You know, this is something that people are backwards and forwards and in and out, and it's really important that we stay in touch, because we never know when somebody might look to support from us in our professional roles or for us as a charity. And sometimes the concern is that people with inherited sight loss are told that there is nothing that can be done for them, and they effectively drop out. They're no longer in the system. And the worry is that when something happens, like, you know, Rob's experience, they don't know where to turn. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's really important. Elisa, you're the youngest in the group today.
Wow.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about sort of your schooling and education, and maybe some of the aids that you've used?
Yeah, so as you've probably gathered, that I've lived with sight loss forever. So that meant, you know, going to school, sixth form, and now at university with a vision impairment. So in terms of schooling, I always went mainstream, both primary and secondary. It was actually the QTVI from the borough when she came to do sort of like home visits, and I do remember this very well, being very excited as a child when she used to come home, and she, you know, told my parents that it would be the best way because it means that I'm amongst people who are, you know, able-bodied, and I get a taste of what the real world is like. And I know for a lot of people, they say that specialist schooling is the best, which I can agree to, because they can meet your needs at your fingertips, basically. You know, there's mobility officers, there's QTVIs, everything is accessible. But the downer to that is that you aren't exposed to the real world and what people's attitudes can be, you know, the negativity, the positivity. So I'm glad in a way that I took that step and attended mainstream schooling. So when I was in nursery, I learned to read and write in Braille, and I have my notes here brailled out, which I brailled out myself as well. I could have navigated my education in large print, but you know, it would have had to be huge, so the print probably size 48, and that just didn't seem practical. But I'm grateful that I learnt to read and write in Braille, because it means that I have a unique way of reading with my fingers. And it's a skill that I often tell people that they should have, because as wonderful as the world of computers is, a computer's not going to teach you how to spell, how to read, write. So I really do advocate for that. So I started off using Braille on the Perkins, which for those of you who aren't sure what that is, it's like a typewriter where you put paper in, and it's set out. You've got 6 keys, and then you've got your space bar, and then you've got a backspace key, and then another key that has you can use to put the lines up and down. So that's that. And then, you know, as I got older, I was exposed to things like the Human Ware's Braille Note Taker, which is a Braille note taker designed for people who are VI. So you can do things on that sighted people can do on a computer, you know, use the internet, writing documents, reading books. Everything's basically at your fingertips. I did learn to touch type at school, but obviously never really went further than that. But now that I'm at university, you know, I've put a lot of my faith in using a Mac with VoiceOver. And VoiceOver is a screen reader that's inbuilt into all of Apple's products free of charge, which is something that everybody wants. And, you know, I similarly use an iPhone with VoiceOver, an iPad with VoiceOver. And I wasn't always for it. When I had a little bit of vision, you know, like many children, many teens, I was stubborn. I didn't want to use it. I thought, no, what's the point of this? But then, you know, when I turned 16 and that vision was taken away from me, it kind of left me with, you have no choice, you've got to do it. And, you know, now I can't live without my apple orchard, as I like to call it. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Lisa. Ben, could you tell us a little bit about work and home for you, please?
Yeah, so growing up in Dubai, I'm not sure if anyone knows this, but things like disability are not actually as far advanced as we might be here in the UK. So as I grew up there and having a father that had this sight loss condition, I was always in my mind, whether it was from family influence or from internalized desire to not be different, secretive about my sight loss. I could pass, and I did. I went to mainstream school, and my dad was a mechanic by trade, so essentially if he had spoken and said and shared his condition, his whole career would have changed. And I know that a number of people do decide to change, but growing up in the 50s, I'm not sure that it was potentially something that would have allowed him to live the life that he has lived. And I think for me, growing up in Dubai, knowing that accessibility wasn't a priority, and they actually label people as people with determination, so people trying really hard. And I think that it's something that I feel quite passionate about sharing, not because I think that we should tear down another community or a culture, but just to recognise where we are in terms of disability people, people living with a disability and their ability to live the life that they would like to live, and the restrictions we might have on career internationally or leaving the UK. So for myself, I actually didn't tell my employer that I had a sight loss condition until I was registered blind or severely sight impaired, as it is now. And I remember that day and thinking I'd spent 18 years of my life, 21 years of my life in hiding, not professing to friends, not professing to colleagues, that I had to live my life a little bit differently for fear of being othered and for fear of being rejected in a way, refused opportunities that somebody else might get because I'm more expensive. So if I talk about my career now, I am at a point where internally I think I stop myself and I think I can't drive, so how can I go to client meetings? I'm more expensive. If they interview somebody else and that person has exactly what I have but is able-bodied, will that influence their decision? And I know that there are protections in place, but living with this sight loss condition, those are things that we feel and think. And I think even now, at 29, I'm still learning how to navigate my career and what I'd like to do versus what I don't want to say what I can do, because I advocate and I believe that you should be allowed to live your life in a way that is safe and authentic to yourself. And that's where this raising awareness has come from. I have content creation that I do now so that I can stop one person hiding who they are with an inherited sight loss condition, or to help somebody see that there is someone in a position or a role that they could then aspire to be in. And I just hope to be a positive influence on others living with my condition. To know that we don't have all the answers. I don't speak as an expert in sight loss. I don't speak as an expert in how you should navigate your career, but we should be allowed to dream and we should be allowed to want. And if that looks a little bit different to other people, and I'm not sat here as a race car driver today, but if it looks a little bit different and I can still be involved in something that I feel passionate about and that feeds my soul, so should others. So hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jen. James, if you could tell us a bit about how the condition affects you, particularly sort of, I think we touched on when we spoke before, some of your maybe social life, particularly in the evenings.
Yeah, so one of the things that might sound strange, but I was actually grateful to be diagnosed at a younger age, because it just always was a factor, and you kind of develop ways of coping with it as you grow up, and it's just natural, it's like automatic. So I didn't really ever have a moment of like, I need to come to terms with this when I was older. It was just always a thing when I was younger. So the thing for me is that I was always so used to having it that I never wanted to identify with it, do you know? It's kind of like Jane and Rob were saying, where it's almost like an identity crisis, where you don't really want to identify as someone who's visually impaired when you're younger, especially when you're in school or whatever. And I always came across as someone who, I was very lucky to have a good amount of sight in general, especially when I was a bit younger, in teenage years, where you would never really know unless I was in a certain condition like nighttime or it was dark or whatever, then people might be able to tell. But at that time I used to kind of get away with it, So socially I was very stubborn. I feel like it comes back to not wanting to identify with the whole thing. Like I would go on nights out when I probably shouldn't have, like when it was dark or whatever, and I'd bump into people, or I get kicked out and like a bouncer would think I was drunk or something, but I just couldn't see. Do you know what I mean? So and it happened an awful lot, like, but I was so stubborn with it that I would just force myself to go each time. And it might not be, I don't know if that's great advice, like I wouldn't say go out, you know what I mean, if you can't see, but like I think that I would refuse not to live, if that makes sense, you know what I mean? And I would still go out with my buddies and I would still have a good time, like, but it is tricky, and there's no sugarcoating it really. Like on nights out, it can be very overwhelming. Like if you're in a loud place, like, and it's like the lighting is poor and you can't hear, and even to this day, like I'll still go to like festivals and stuff with my buddies, but I'm so lucky to have a support system that are so aware of it. So like my friends will be very aware of me and like me not being able to see at night. And I'm just super fortunate to have them in that situation. But like, it is very tricky in social settings, and you'd have lower confidence and things like that going into like a new group setting or any kind of new environment. Like it's easier. Like for me, what I would do is I would often go to the same place. Like when I lived in Cork in Ireland, when we were going out, we'd often go to the same place, and I'd have to map it in my head. And I think I'm familiar with this place now, so I know roughly where things are. I can picture it in my head. But new environments and stuff like that can be tough. Like I remember when I moved to Liverpool first, and I wasn't familiar with any of like the bars or like the layout of the city at night or anything like that. And you have to take time when you have a visual impairment to kind of get to know places. And the second time visiting somewhere is always easier than the first time, I find, you know, because you've experienced in that place. Like, but yeah, another thing I wanted to touch on is just that point of impact that Rob was speaking about. I remember there was like a turning point because I never wanted to, like, as I say, identify with it. But a lot of the time it comes to the point where you're kind of forced to identify with it. You're kind of forced to face it. And that point for me was when I got cataracts in both eyes. And cataracts is often associated with older people. You know, you think you don't get cataracts till you're like 90 or whatever. So it was surprising to me because I just went in for a general checkup and they said, we can see the cataracts developing in your eyes. And I was thinking, how? I'm only like 21, you know? So the thing is, that was my point of impact, I'd say, you know, and it was like, I went in and got 2 cataract surgeries then. And the thing with cataract surgery is that they replace, obviously I'm sure a lot of you are obviously familiar, but they replace the lens in your eye so it can no longer focus on close objects, depending on the cataract lens you get. But with the one I got anyway, like I went from like not being able to read my phone without my glasses and everything, like being able to read everything, my screens, video games, whatever, overnight after the surgery, like I couldn't read anymore. Do you know what I mean? So that was like my point of impact without reading glasses, you know? So that was super relatable to like what Rob was speaking about, is that sometimes you kind of will pretend you don't have it or you'll try to ignore it or whatever, but especially with something that's degenerative, like you're gonna have to face it. But it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because when I started to accept it then and I realized I hit that point of impact and I goes, okay, look, I'm gonna have to start telling people about this. It was actually a huge weight off my shoulders because when you're trying to hide it, it actually makes life a bit harder because you're trying to come up with different explanations for like why something happened or, you know, like why you tripped over something or why you didn't see something or whatever. You'd be trying to come up with your own explanation for it, but if you just said, oh, I have visual impairment, that's it. You know what I mean? It takes like a lot of weight off your shoulders that way. So I think my life actually got easier when I started being more open about it with employers or with friends or everything. You know, I think it allowed other people to support me, whereas before there was no way. Do you get me? Because they just didn't know, if that makes sense.
Really, really important point, and I guess everybody comes to that at different stages. It's a very personal thing. One of the things that we chatted about, some of you guys were part of a young adults focus group that we held recently to understand how we can better support you. And Kester, one of the things we talked about was family dynamic, and I found it really interesting, and I wondered whether, I'm going to ask a few of you just to talk about that dynamic within the family. So you're diagnosed with a condition, you're coming to terms with it yourself, but obviously sight loss doesn't just affect the individual who's diagnosed, it's affecting the whole family. Can you tell us a bit about how that felt for you, please?
Yes, absolutely. In the sort of very earliest days of sight loss, on sort of hearing about the sight loss, which we realised was probably on the radar, not because we'd gone into the appointment, but because after receiving the referral, my mum did some research and she started reading and she went, oh no, I can see the direction this is going. So she came and gave me the news and she was in absolute tears. She was distraught, you know, by the sort of what she had discovered and sort of needing to deliver the news herself. It was something that really clearly affected her very heavily in a way where she had always been used to me having a disability. Like I said, grew up with hearing impairment, and she was always very kind of matter of fact about that. But with the sort of the new information, I felt that she sort of had this panic of going, is my kid going to be okay? Which is simultaneously something where, you know, of course she was worried. Naturally, she'd be worried. And, you know, naturally, she had a really hard time with it. And for my part, unfortunately, I had a difficult time with that because I ended up feeling sort of like, as the person who was being diagnosed with sight loss, I had to comfort the people around me about my sight loss because they were getting so worried about me and my visual condition, about whether I was going to be okay, and, you know, and sort of feeling like I wasn't going to be okay, that I was, you know, my very early stages of processing everything that was going on, which I did process it pretty well, but I then was in a position of, in terms of getting to genuinely and authentically explore and experience both the fear and the scary parts and the unpleasant parts of having a disability in a way that is real and not a catastrophe, as it were. It's very difficult to experience that with your family in a way where it can feel like it needs to be one or the other. With time helps that, of course, because people then see what it means. People then see what it means, and that it settles down a little bit. You know, these days, obviously, you know, it's been quite some time, you know. I'd say that it's a, you know, very supportive family, very, you know, relaxed family, in a way that I think, again, I think it's helped by the fact that I was deaf from a very young age, so there was, I think, less acclimation. But even then, it was definitely a really difficult point in time that definitely, especially at that age, when I was 16, you know, a teenager, things are already a little bit fractious and tense in a family, for any family at that stage. And so it was just an extra kind of rock in the river, I think.
Thank you, and I think that's really important that we do talk about the family dynamic and the importance of considering what parents are feeling and the impact that that has on the family. At Retina UK, we support a lot of parents, often at point of diagnosis. We don't support under 18s directly, but our role is to support the parents and help them to come to terms with the news that they've had in order for them to best support young adults. Rob, do you want to add something to this around how mum was?
Yeah, well, gratefully they're not here, so. So yeah, I mean, I'm very stubborn, as you might have realised, and the really funny thing is, so many stories of me doing stuff when I was younger, so my parents know nothing about that. You like, blind people shouldn't be doing stuff like that, you know, nights out and various situations, but. It's only been the last couple of years, as I've matured into my middle ages, that I spoke to my parents about my sight loss, and they'd always been, my mum's always been very protective of me. I mean, I'm 44 years old, and even yesterday she was still offering to send my dad on the train with me. And it's like, that's what passenger assistance is for, you know. But I hadn't realised the level of guilt, because we don't ask our parents these kind of difficult questions, and it was only when I was watching back some video stuff of them that they talked about stuff, and my mum is just, even now, just so guilty for what she blames herself for. My dad, not so much. He doesn't take any ownership of that. It's like my mum is the guilty one. Dad's just like, yeah, he's good, he's all right.
Yeah.
But it's really hard, and like Hester said, you feel as a blind person, I don't know what anyone else feels like, but you have to, even when you're not okay, you have to make out that you're doing okay. You know, it's not a problem. It doesn't matter. It's all right. Because yeah, you're hyper aware of the emotion that everyone else is going through for you. It's quite a lot to deal with.
Yeah, and it is something, I mean, I'm conscious of time, but I think everybody here would be able to speak to those experiences around the whole sort of family dynamic. I wanted to talk a little bit about your involvement with Retina UK and the difference that that's made for you. For the sake of time, I'll just let people know how you found out about the charity. So, James, you Googled us, I do believe. Eliza, you found us on the Look, shout out to Look, who are here with us today, I think, Look Facebook group. Jen, you came across the peer support group through your advocacy and social media work. Kester, your parents introduced you to Retina UK, didn't they, some time ago? And Rob, you came to us through fundraising. So that's fantastic that these people have all found the charity in different ways. None of them were referred to Retina UK at point of diagnosis. That's concerning. That's really concerning. So great that we've got everybody on board, but obviously what we all want to happen is that at point of diagnosis, they're made aware of the charity and the support that we can offer. So that it's not down to Google, where actually, you know, you could have found anybody on Google. Fortunately, it was us. But yeah, I just wanted to touch on that. James, can you tell me a little bit about that first call to Retina UK, just sort of briefly, how that came about and what that meant to you?
Yeah, so I just moved to Liverpool, and it was my first week in the country about 1.5 years ago, and one of the first things I wanted to do when I moved over was to get connected with any charities that might be relevant in terms of the RP, you know, and I'd worked with certain charities in Ireland, but and they do amazing work, but I just don't think the resources are there. Ireland is much smaller, like, and it's not as well recognised. But when I came over here, I found Retina UK kind of just through Google, as I was saying, and I just phoned up the helpline and I got through to Mark. And I've told this story so many times, but it never gets old. Like, I just rang Mark and I was like, we just had an amazing conversation about the whole thing. And the crazy thing about speaking to Mark was that I'd never actually talked to someone with RP before that point, which is crazy, really. But like, growing up my whole life, never once had I spoken to anyone with RP. And there had been members of my family who had it, but they were much older and they kind of passed away by the time I was, you know, old enough to really discuss it. So I had that phone call with Mark, and it was like, it was really amazing, because it made me feel like to be able to talk to someone who had and understood everything about the disease without having to explain it anyway. Like, Mark just got it straight away, you know what I mean? So the fact that there's people on the helpline that have inherited sight loss is so, like, it feels rare, you know, like, it's not something I've ever encountered before, but it was so special because of that, because, as I said, like, there's nothing more comforting when you have a disease like that than to be able to speak to someone who has it too. And Mark, being a bit older than me, had more life experience around it as well, and he had a lot of positivity to offer, and I've always been super positive about it since the diagnosis. Like, since I was a kid, I was never negative, but it was really nice to talk to someone who I could relate to that way, and who was also super positive about it, and have like a productive conversation. He helped me in so many ways in terms of like, because when I just moved over, like, I didn't even have anywhere to live. I was in like an Airbnb with my buddy. So he was like helping us find houses and all sorts. Like, you know, I was like, Mark, will you relax? I was like, you're doing too much. Yeah, I can never speak enough positivity about that first interaction, and I never forget it. Like, I remember where I was sitting, like, you know what I mean, everything, you know, yeah. And yeah, so it was really amazing to have that phone call, for sure.
Thank you. So did Mark slip you a £20 note to say all that? He is somewhere in the room today.
I'm here doing it for free.
Jen, you had, I guess, quite a poignant moment, really, didn't you, when you came along to a peer support group? Can you tell people about that?
We touched a little bit on how I might have come out as a blind person in my adult life. And similar to James's experience, other than people in my family, my father and my brother, I'd never met a woman with RP. And although my diagnosis is cone and rod dystrophy, in my family I had always, we would always refer to the condition as RP, because that's what my dad has, that's what my brother has. And when I reference it, I, for a long time, identified as having RP. And when I came onto this call, I was in a position of, I'd been silent for a long time. And I found my voice when I started to interact and realize that if I don't speak about the experiences I've had, there is a young girl or a young boy sitting somewhere silently, suffering, not, feeling that they are able to be who they are. And when I came onto this peer support group, I was just, in the depths of advocacy. I was like, right, I'm going to do everything. I'm going to change the world. I'm going to make sure that people are being educated on how to speak to people that are blind or identify as visually impaired. And there was this link to peer support on Instagram. So I just thought, I'll sign up at Zoom, we'll see how it goes. I'd never really engaged with Retina UK or even heard much about them. And I was listening to a lady speak, and she said, I've never seen a star in the sky. And it was another woman that spoke who was working and had, you know, a career and a family and children, and they talked about being mothers, and I cried. Rodri was in the room, my partner, and it was a pivotal moment in my life, and I'd never found that belonging before. Like James and Rob, and I was going on nights out, I had my friends that were a unit, and they understood me, but even the closest people to me, sometimes I feel unkind in how I get frustrated that they don't understand me, and they don't understand because I don't look blind. So when I found Retina UK, all the other charities that I work with and I volunteer with, it felt like I was home, and I'd found people that I could talk to and speak to. And for me, I think I've spoken to Paula about this before, my interaction with healthcare professionals, unfortunately, has been very negative. I was told not to have children because of my condition, despite being able-bodied, loved, happy, you know, safe in my family life. And when I came onto this call and saw mothers, women that had had children, and I think her name was Diane, there was a lady that shared that 50 years ago she was told by a healthcare professional not to have children because it was, you know, not the right thing to do. At 18 years old, which was 10 years ago, I was told the same thing and have been by multiple people. So I think, I'm sure those people are not in this room, because if you felt that way, you wouldn't be here. But I do think signposting people to Retina UK when there aren't cures and there aren't treatments is the lifeline to people like myself. Because peer support for me and having that pivotal moment with Paula and the other ladies on that call, I felt like maybe I can be a mum one day. Maybe I'm going to get to be, you know, a role model to my children that don't exist yet. But yeah, it's really important to me that I share that, because I think that it's shocking to see that as someone so young as myself who hasn't started a family yet, that is something that if I hadn't engaged with Retina UK, I wouldn't feel confident to share in such a public forum. So thanks, Paula, and everyone else wearing a T-shirt.
It was I think it was probably a really powerful meeting actually for all involved. It was the first time we'd held a group specifically for women, and we have the young adults group, which a number of you guys are part of, I know. But for me, the power of seeing young women, yourself in particular, Jen, around women that have lived with a condition for a long time and have happy, fulfilling, successful lives was probably one of the most powerful things I've seen for a really long time. And this is why peer-to-peer support is so important. This is why we would encourage you to refer, because with the best will in the world, you know, we can't, within clinics, for example, engineer that kind of conversation. That is something that is a very private moment, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us. I'm really conscious that we're nearly over on time, but there's just a, am I allowed? Just a tiny bit longer? No? Yeah? Rather than go to each of you, I'm just going to refer to a few notes. So I think we've heard about the importance of that support. We were going to talk about research and clinical trials, but we've run out of time. But if anybody's interested in speaking to someone who has experience of taking part in a clinical trial and the hope and positivity that brings, James is your man. Are you hanging around for a bit, James?
Yeah, I will do.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to chat to James, I know you've got some really positive stuff to say about the opportunity. And in fact, I think you found that opportunity through Retina UK, didn't you, for being part of the lived experience panel. I would just like to invite each of you. Eliza, I do just want to thank you because you're involved in volunteering with the charity. You're a talk and support volunteer, aren't you? So
Yes, yeah, I am.
And I know that you've told me that you get an awful lot out of having those interactions with other young people and supporting them that way. I think if there was just one thing you wanted to say to professionals in the room about the importance of referring in very few words, because Lauren will start to get cross in a minute, what would they be? Kester, can I come to you first? What would you say to the professionals in the room?
it is a known thing in the sight loss space in general that there's lots of very small, very disparate organisations that are very locally based, and naturally sight loss presents a barrier to finding resources, finding what's in the area, because it can be a barrier to information. A lot of how I found a lot of the support that I've accessed has truly been through word of mouth. It's truly been through talking to people, through organisations saying, there's this that you can access, there's this that you can access, pointing me in a direction as the kind of my way of getting along the chain. And especially, you know, I will always sing the praises of the RNIB as a broader, access to broader resources. And I think that worked perfectly in tandem with connection to those sort of smaller groups, more focused groups, you know, that give more focused research, more focused resources, because sight loss is different across different people. And so I think that is of vital importance in terms of getting everyone connected to people who can understand and help.
Thank you. And we do collaborate, as I'm sure many of you know, in the room with the other sight loss organisations to make sure that we're complementing each other's work and not duplicating it. Rob, this isn't a moment just to mention the YouTube channel, by the way. This is a...
Oh, I've done that enough.
Yeah, okay. What would you say to the folk in the room?
I'd say thank you, because it's just the fact that you're here listening to us means that you care. But I think all of us on the stage sound like we are people that will kick the door down to get the help for ourselves. And the thing that I think a lot of us advocate for is there are an awful lot of people with sight loss conditions who don't have that confidence or the support network, and they're the people that need your help. Like, you know, the referrals for everyone with sight loss should be, you know, of utmost importance, I think.
You may now mention the YouTube channel.
No, it's called Blind Focus with Rob's Ears. So if you want to subscribe, it make me very happy, because I scroll and check all the time. So it's all good. But thank you. But thank you so much for listening, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Rob. Elisa, what would you like to say?
I think I would say to people that they should get involved with sight loss charities, because when I was growing up, there wasn't as much awareness, you know, in the early 2000s, if you like. And also when I was 16 and I was going through losing, it wasn't a lot of vision, but it meant a lot to me. And, you know, I wish that I reached out and said, hey, I'm struggling. And that's not to say I didn't have a supportive network, because I did, of QTVIs, teachers at school, my parents, my sisters, you know, the rest of my family. But, you know, sometimes you just need somebody who understands what you're going through. And I think it's better to ask than not ask and be alone and struggle, which is why I find joy in volunteering, because I want young people to know that there is somebody who is willing to listen and that you can cry on their shoulder.
Thank you, Elisa. Jen, you may also promote your social media.
Oh, well, I might promote Rob's while I'm here. I'm actually already subscribed. So yeah, pinch me moment. I've seen him in real life. But I think if I was entirely truthful, my experience with healthcare professionals in Wales has been poor. It took me 10 years to have the confidence to ask for a second opinion because of the experiences I'd had. And I think the resilience that we speak of as people with visual impairment is we're very lucky. And when I say lucky, I don't speak on behalf of other people when I share that. I recognise my individual privilege that I had a family that assumed and supported from me being little to growing up that this might be something that makes me different, but it doesn't entirely make me Jen. So if I was to say one thing that I would ask when you're speaking to somebody either at diagnosis or at the yearly appointment where you might say there's no change or there's nothing exciting here, that yearly appointment, be present, listen, even if you can just give them that airtime to share with you. And if you for example, signpost them to Retina UK. We know that there's not a lot that people can do for us, but we go to these appointments so that we can have clinical trials, so that there's a record that we exist, that we have an opportunity to help in this progression of what is available to us. And I think that remember that the person there might, even if they're quiet, even if you've got so many patients in that day, just be present for that time with them, because it might feel to them, we were on that peer support group and there was a lady on there who didn't have family that were prepared for the diagnosis, and she didn't have a community yet, but she found that through Retina UK. So if you're not sure, and from past the science point, the person sat in front of you deserves that presence. So I again, as Rob said, you're here because you care, and I'm so grateful that I've come to a point now where I can speak to healthcare professionals and not feel anger in my heart. So yeah, there are no recordings in that appointment, and what you say really stays with us and it changes us. So I'm really grateful to be a part of this panel, and grateful to you all for listening to me rant on about. But also, if you would like to follow me, it's Blind Reacts Cardiff. But yeah.
Thank you. And then James, the last words are yours.
I think the point of diagnosis is extremely critical, and I think that the things you say in that moment will stay with the person when they're getting diagnosed forever. So, like, to give an example, like, I kind of got diagnosed twice, right? Like, so when I was about 5 in Ireland, they kind of started catching on there was something not quite right, but they couldn't really put their finger on it because it was like 20 years ago or whatever. And they didn't really know how to deliver the news, right? So they basically were like, they presented it in a really poor way where it was like, there's nothing we can do and he's going to go blind, basically, is what they told my mom, right? And then I went to Paris and I got kind of like, let's say, re-diagnosed. I went back and did all the testing again, and they did all the tests of the back of the eye and the retina and everything, and they could see the pigmentation. And they said, I sat down with 3 doctors, and I was like 6, but I still remember it perfectly. You know what I mean? Like, and that goes to show like how pivotal that moment is and how important it is, because I was 6 and I could recount it like it was yesterday, And those doctors, they said, now this is obviously a very privileged kind of thing to say, right? But they said that if there's not some sort of treatment for XLRP within the next 15 years, then they'd retire. That's what they told me, right? And that's such an optimistic point of view, and in contrast to what I experienced in Ireland, when they didn't really, they were like, they didn't really know what to say. And I never forgot what the doctors in Paris told me when they said 15 years, there has to be something by then. And that sentence kept me going, and I know that is very individual, and there's some things that aren't yet, well, most of it isn't treatable at all yet, but I think we're on the cusp of treatment for a lot of these things, and I think referral to Retina UK, in my case, was actually a referral to treatment, and it was direct treatment for a clinical trial. And I was aware of the clinical trials, but I was directly signposted into the clinic through Retina UK. So in a way, as healthcare professionals, if you are signposting your patients, you might actually be signposting them into direct treatment, especially in the next few years. You know what I mean? So, and if treatment isn't available for whatever condition, you're still getting signposted into the place you need to be, really, because the peer group and everything. And as I was saying, I never spoke to anybody with RP before my interactions with Retina UK, apart from my own brothers, but outside my family, So even if you're not directing them into direct treatment, it's still the social circle that someone who's visually impaired needs to be a part of. So I think it's really critical
Thank you, James.
to be signposted there.
Thank you. Well, I'm really sorry that we've run over and run out of time, but I think we could talk all day, but we don't have the opportunity to do that. So please, please, please do come and find these guys in the break. I'm sure you'll all be happy to chat more, won't you, about your experiences. But I'd just like you to join me in thanking James, Jen, Eliza, Rob and Kester for being so open with their experiences this morning. If some of my colleagues could help us when we leave the stage, that would be great. Thank you.